In this video, you're going to learn 3 ways to find high-quality worship team members for your worship team. Coming up. Hey everyone, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips, head over to Instagram or Facebook at Leading Worship Well, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. But you're here on YouTube, so hit the subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on future worship leading training videos just like this one. And let's get into it, because today we're talking about how to find not just worship team members, but high quality worship team members. And I feel like some definitions are in order, because to imply that there are high quality worship team members also implies that there are low quality worship team members. And that sounds kind of offensive, but I want to be clear on what I mean about that, because I'm not talking about the character of the volunteers or that they're less in the church, because I think that low quality volunteers can be fostered to become high quality volunteers. But here's what I mean by low quality and high quality. And I'll give you some examples, because I'll define it through examples. I think that's easier to understand. A low quality worship team volunteer shows up late to rehearsal. You know the type, right? They aren't prepared when they do show up, and they don't actually know their music. A low quality worship team volunteer is not teachable, and they aren't humble, and they're prideful, and they try to do things their own way all the time and think that they always know what's best. And then ultimately, a low-quality worship team volunteer is not unified with the rest of the team, and maybe they cause conflict in the team. So that's sort of a picture of what a low-quality worship team volunteer would look like. On the other hand, a high-quality worship volunteer would do the opposite of those things. They would show up to rehearsal not just on time, but probably a couple minutes early to get things set up and make sure they're ready to go whenever you're actually going to start rehearsal. Or they'd show up and they'd know all their parts and know all their music, and they would just know what they're doing in general, so you don't have to start and stop a million times to try to teach them what they should already know. A high quality worship team volunteer is humble and teachable. You can go up to them and say, hey, I love what you're doing, but I think that you could work on this and improve this. And they would receive that critique and try to get better at whatever you told them. And finally, a high quality worship team volunteer is united with the team. They don't cause conflict in the team. So those are some examples of low quality volunteers and high quality volunteers. Now here's the problem, because essentially what we're talking about in this video is growing our worship team. Because if you serve really in any church, but I think of it from a small church perspective, because maybe you lead in a small church, I lead in a small church, and maybe you've only got one person, maybe it's just you on the worship team, maybe you have like 5 people, but it always feels like if we could just have just a few more people on the worship team, all of our problems would be solved. Our worship team would sound bigger, right? We'd have more people playing different instruments, and it would give a different feel to our worship gatherings. That would be awesome, right? Or how about this one? Maybe if you had more people on your worship team, you could actually take a Sunday off once a year. That would be nice, right? All of these things, if we just had more people on our worship team, it seems like our problems would be solved. And when we come to the problem with that mindset, what often happens is that instead of searching for the best volunteers or people that we can develop and grow into the best volunteers, we end up seeking out low quality volunteers, and we lower the bar super low. And so we get, 5 or 10 people on the worship team, but a year in, we find out that they're not really doing what we wish they would be doing. They aren't high quality volunteers because we've set the bar so low. And now we've got 10 people on our worship team, but they're not really doing what they're supposed to be doing, so we're worse off than when we started in the first place. So instead of just thinking about growing our worship team in size, we also want to think about finding high quality worship team volunteers. So people don't just last for a year, but they're there for 5 years or however long, and they are high quality worship team volunteers who do what they need to do to serve and lead well. The question is, how do you find high quality worship team volunteers? I mean, it's hard enough to find anybody who wants to join the worship team a lot of times. So how do we find not just any old volunteer, but high quality worship team volunteers? Well, I'm going to share with you these 3 ways that you can find high quality worship team volunteers. So here's the first one. The first way to find high quality worship team volunteers is to set the expectations for your team high. Set the expectations for your team high. And I know this kind of sounds counterproductive. If you want to get more people on your team, it seems like maybe I should lower the standard of what it means to join the team, and then more people will be able to join. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning. That might be true. You might get more people to join, but they're low quality. So whenever we set the expectations high, and we say, hey, this is going to require an actual commitment. It's not just going to be, I'm going to show up on Sunday morning 5 minutes before the service starts and you're going to be able to sing. We're going to have midweek rehearsals, and you're going to be responsible for knowing your part whenever you come to those. And then we're going to run through, and it's going to be like an hour or an hour and a half rehearsal. And then we're going to do it again on Sunday morning before people show up, because we're setting the expectations high. We want high quality volunteers. And so you've got to set them high, and that's going to disqualify some people because they aren't going to be able to commit to that. But in the end, it's going to be better for your team. We want to set the expectations high so that we attract high quality volunteers. And what happens is, and this is the slower process to growth. If you set the low expectations, you're going to get low quality volunteers, but your team's going to grow, but it's not going to last for very long. It's going to happen fast, but it's not going to last for very long. When you set high expectations, it takes a little bit longer. It doesn't happen instantly overnight, but what you're going to find is, okay, instead of 5 low quality volunteers, now I have me and one other person, and it's high quality. And maybe a year later, you find another high quality volunteer. And what happens is those high expectations and a culture of excellence attracts other high quality volunteers who want to be a part of what you're doing. Because when you set the expectations low and things aren't done with excellence, those high quality volunteers in your church that might have wanted to be a part of what you were doing, they look at your worship team and say they don't really care about what they're doing. They aren't doing things with excellence. And so I don't really want to be a part of that. So I'm going to stay away from that. So set expectations high, because then you'll only have high quality volunteers who join your worship team. Also, it communicates to low quality volunteers, once again, people who show up late, all of those things. It communicates to them that if they want to join the team, they need to become a high quality volunteer, and it takes commitment to do that. And so through that process, you can help them develop and become high quality volunteers. And then that high quality culture of excellence allows or attracts other high quality volunteers ultimately. So that's the first thing, set high expectations. The second thing you can do is to simply ask people. Ask people to join your worship team. And here's why this attracts high quality volunteers. Obviously, you could just do like an announcement slide. I've seen this plenty of times. There's an announcement slide. Hey, we've got worship team auditions coming up on XYZ. We're going to be doing this, blah, blah, blah. And you should be doing that. You should be communicating to your church the opportunity that exists to join your worship team. And you might get a few people from that. But the best way to find high quality volunteers is to go and actually ask people and figure out whether they'd be a good fit on your worship team or not. Figure out that guy that you've never talked to who sits in the back and he's been coming to church for like 8 months, but you've never really had a chance to connect with him. And then all of a sudden you find out that he plays bass or drums or whatever. Usually those are the high quality volunteers. And I'll just be upfront. What I've learned over time is that probably 75% of the time, the people who come up to you and are so gung-ho about joining the worship team, and they're like, yeah, I know I've only been coming to this church for 2 weeks, but I really feel called to serve on your worship team. I've been leading worship for 5 years, and I think that I'm really good, and I know how to lead songs, and I have a really good singing voice. Do you mind if I join your worship team? Usually those people don't work out in the long term. And obviously still hear them out and kind of put them through the process of going through your worship team, but just be careful with those people, because what I've learned, probably 3 or 4 times now it's happened, where people are super excited about joining the worship team and then things don't work out. So just be careful with those people, and instead go and have conversations with people in your church and ask them, like, just through general conversation. Don't just walk up to somebody randomly and be like, do you play an instrument or do you sing? But have authentic communication with somebody, and through that you'll find out whether somebody might be good for your worship team or not. And then oftentimes they're usually more humble, because they didn't come up to you boasting about all of their talents and how great they are. They were sitting in the back. And here's what's true. Usually the high quality volunteers in your church are waiting to be asked. They want to be asked. They aren't going to come up to you and say how great they are and that they want to join your team. They're simply waiting to be asked. So think about, even if you're in a church of under 100 people, there's probably 3 or 4 people in your church who are waiting to be asked. So number 2 way to find high quality worship team volunteers in your church is to go ask people. Go build relationships with the people of your church and ask them. The final tip is to train people. Sometimes you don't have high quality worship team members in your church, and so the only way that you can get them is to train people. And this takes time. All of these things take time. It's easy to find low quality worship team members. You could pad your worship team with probably 10 more people by next Sunday. I know that sounds crazy, but if you literally just asked and said, can you sing with me on Sunday, people would probably be interested. But if we want to build high quality worship team members, it takes time. And one of the ways that you can do that is to train them. So maybe that means teaching them an instrument. Maybe they just started playing guitar and they don't really know how to play. And so you sit down with them and you do guitar lessons for 3 months or 6 months or even a year. And at the end of that time, they're musically proficient. But even beyond just teaching people the musical side of leading worship, I also think that it's important to train up people in the culture of your team. And if you've set a culture of excellence through setting high expectations, that's going to take time, because it's not just like, hey, you can show up whenever you want and play with us on Sunday. There's that set structure of, we've got rehearsal and you have to be at rehearsal to play on Sunday, and then we're going to rehearse through songs before Sunday morning. All of those things. Train people up, not just in the musical side of things, but in the culture of your team, which should be a culture of excellence. And that's ultimately the way that you can take low quality volunteers and turn them into high quality volunteers, or just people who didn't even know that they were called to serve on a worship team, and you can train them up, develop them into high quality worship team volunteers. So if you feel like your worship team needs some more high quality volunteers, number 1, set the expectations high. Number 2, ask people. Don't just wait for people to come up to you. Oftentimes that isn't the best way to find people. Those people usually don't work out. The people who are super gung-ho and talk about how good they are and how amazing of a singer they are, those people don't work out. Usually it's the person in the back who is quiet and reserved and is just waiting for someone to come up to ask them. So number 2, ask people in your church through authentic conversations. And then finally, number 3, if you can't find anybody, train people up and make them into high quality worship team volunteers. Thanks so much for joining me today. Before you go, I just want to share with you this free audio training that I put together. It's called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. And in this audio training, I share 5 simple tips that will instantly improve your worship leading. These are things that are pretty easy, but you've got to know them, and oftentimes we don't know them. So once you know them and make the conscious effort to actually apply them to your worship leading, they will improve your worship leading. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today in this video. Once again, my name is Spencer Cormany from leadingworshipwell.com. Go follow me on Instagram or Facebook at leadingworshipwell, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. I'd love to connect with you over there. I'll catch you in the next video. Keep leading worship well.